All right. Welcome, Natalia Sylvester, to Peruvians of USA Book Club. We're so excited to have you here. I am thrilled that you're here. First of all, let me just say thank you for writing such a beautiful book. This month we read Breathe and Count Back from 10. As I mentioned, and as I showed you earlier, I have a bunch of little sticky notes. I have highlighted certain quotes, certain things that were special to me. It's definitely a book that I would have loved to have when I was a young girl trying to figure out my way in this world, being an immigrant, having parents who are Peruvian. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the audience who is joining to have this discussion. How are you today, Natalia?
Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you all so much for being here. I'm so honored. This means a lot to me, and I when I wrote this book, I remember one of my deepest wishes for it was that fellow Peruvians would read it, and the fact that you all are here, it means the world. So thank you.
Thank you. And so I'm going to read a brief bio so members of the audience can just get to know you a little bit more. So Natalia Sylvester is the award-winning author of several novels for adults and young adults. Chasing the Sun was named Best Debut Book of 2014 by Latinidad. And Everyone Knows You Go Home won an International Latino Book Award. And in 2018, Jesse H. Jones Award for Best Work of Fiction from the Texas Institute of Letters. I mean, you're making us all proud here, Natalia. Congratulations with all these accolades and awards. You were born in Lima, Peru, and came to the US at the age of 4 and grew up in Florida and Rio Grande Valley in Texas. You received a BA in creative writing from the University of Miami and was a 2021 visited associate professor at the University of Texas at Austin and was formerly a faculty member at the Mile High MFA program at Regents University. All right. Oh my God, I'm so impressed with your awards for writing. I'm so thankful that we connected through Peruvian Sisters. This is the point. This is the point of Peruvians of USA. I started Peruvians of USA 2 years ago in the middle of the pandemic because I wanted to find community within the Peruvian diaspora. There's so many of us out there, and we're not connected, and we had that technology to be connected. And also, growing up, I didn't know about Peruvian authors. I didn't know about Peruvian professionals. And so it's my goal to interview those professionals, interview people having interesting stories, and recording those stories so that others have access to those stories and feel connected to them, feel inspired by them, and feel like they're not alone in their own experiences, because so many of us are the only Peruvians that we know. So
Yeah, you've done such a beautiful job of that. And honestly, I was going to say the same thing when you mentioned that it reminds us we're not alone, because growing up, even though I grew up in Miami, which has a very large Peruvian population, most of the Peruvians I knew were my family. So I didn't really grow up. And then when we moved, because we moved to Central Florida, then we moved to Texas, and in the past few years I've lived in Austin as well. I've always felt a little bit of like a little bit of an outsider in that sense. And yeah, like following your account and everyone you feature, it is that reminder of like, wow, look at us, and we're here and we're powerful and we're doing all these great things. It's
yeah.
really great.
Yeah, we're doing amazing things, and I want the future generations of Peruvian American or just Peruvians around the world to realize, like, to have this repository of stories that they can listen to. So, thank you for being part of it. So first, I wanted to start with some rapid fire questions to get the audience to get to know you a little bit. They should be easy. And so I guess the first section of the rapid fire questions are, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I say this word? Okay. All right.
Okay.
Peru.
Oh my God, love.
The US.
Oh, that's interesting. My mind just went blank.
Yeah. It's okay.
I think of home, but I also think of that with Peru too. Like it's
Mhm.
one of those, that constant pull,
Yeah.
isn't it? For me, because I grew up here, but it was like where my heart is. So
Yeah. Um, Books.
Everything.
Yeah. And swimming.
I'm sorry?
Swimming. Nadar.
Oh, freedom.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so now I'm going to ask a few questions. They're kind of rapid fire, but we'll see. Plato preferido peruano, like your favorite Peruvian dish.
Ay, tallarines en verde.
Ooh, I just had that last week and it's so good.
I was like, you're gonna ask because it's like it depends on what day you ask. It's either that or lomo saltado. I'm either torn. So
Yeah. Mazamorra morada, arroz con leche o combinado.
mazamorra morada.
Okay. I know some like to mix it. I actually like both, but I don't mix it.
You know, I've never done that either.
Yeah.
I know, I mean, I've seen it. I guess I'm a purist in that sense.
You're like, I don't want it to touch. What about music? Huayno o festejo?
Oh, you know, I don't know them. Oh my God, does that make me a bad Peruvian?
No, it doesn't. It does not.
Or it's like, or is it one of those things that I don't realize I know, but
Okay.
maybe I don't know the name of?
Okay. So it's okay. Just different styles of dancing and music, from either from like La Sierra, the Andes part, or Festejo is mostly Afro-Peruvian, and so folks have sometimes the answer is depends on the time of the night. So yeah. All right. So let's get started with learning a little bit about your immigration story. I know you came when you were very young, you were 4 years old, but I am curious, what is that? How would you describe that experience of immigrating here to the US, for us, for others? Like, what did your parents tell you? Because many of us who came young, we rely on the stories of our parents, of what they tell us, why they came, how was the situation there. And so what can you share with us about your own immigrant story coming?
Yeah. So it's something that I think changed over time, like the narrative.
Mm.
I remember when we got, like you said, we got here when I was 4. So I feel like my memory started here. Like really some of my earliest memories are here. And I don't remember Peru from when I lived here, when I was born. Or at least that's what I thought for the longest time, because there was a brief period where we actually lived in Costa Rica first, and then we came to the US. So for the really longest time, I thought my memory had started in Costa Rica. And one day when I was like 20 something, I told my mom, I was like, yeah, because I remember this one night where all the lights went out and we lit candles, and like her whole face just kind of fell. And she was like, that was Lima. And that was the apagones, the blackouts. And that was, because I was there in the late 80s when, when Sendero would attack the electric grid and everything. And I think there were things that she probably thought, well, it's a good thing I don't remember, but that was my first memory. And which was such a contrast to the memory. Like I actually didn't, so I didn't grow up with memories of Peru, but I felt a real strong sense of connection to it, because for the longest time we didn't while we were sorting out our immigration situation and getting the green cards in order, we didn't get to go back until I was like 12. So that to me felt like the first time I'd gone back. But in all those years, my parents really made an effort to make sure that we felt connected to Peru and to our families still there, to our culture. Like I remember my mom at one point, she actually sent for a relative when they came to visit. She had them bring Peruvian textbooks. So when we would come home from school, my sister and I would have to learn Peruvian history. And
Wow.
yeah, and it was just really wonderful. Like we just, I mean, at the time I was like in 3rd grade, and I probably was like, oh, why do we need more schoolwork? But I value it so much now. And we grew up with like homemade Peruvian meals, and I would complain about like, why can't we just have a burger? It's like you always want what other people have. But I feel so lucky that we didn't have to detach, even as we were being raised to really like to be in a country where English very quickly became my dominant language. My parents were really they would pretend not to understand me when I tried to speak to them in English, so that I could preserve my Spanish. And even then I still get a little bit insecure about it at times, because this, like, I'm not as strong in it as I am in English. And then over the years, I think it also just, you know, when I finally did get to visit, to really start to go back and be with family members who would point out the places, like say, here was your home, you know, this was the apartment, this is the bedroom apartment where you know, you remember that story about how Nona had to like go up a ladder to, you know, to rescue you because you'd been locked in the room, and you know, all these things where you start to piece your history together and you realize here are where my roots and my history are too, in addition to the place where you grow up and identify as home, you know. So it's always been, for me, like they coexist, and for a really long time I honestly felt sometimes insecure about like, what, you know, am I Peruvian enough, you know, like, because I'd been, you know, I'd grown up really first in Miami and in Central Florida and then in Texas, not really seeing myself immersed in a community that reflected the community and the culture that I experienced at home. But you know, over time, I kind of just became, I I've learned to really embrace it and understand, like, and I think that's why I think your account is so beautifully and aptly named. Like, it's Peruvians of USA, like these are both parts of us, and that's okay. And it doesn't make us less than anyone. It just means that our experiences are very different, and acknowledging too that in sometimes in very privileged ways, from, you know, from all sorts of different experiences that exist, right? And Peruvians in different countries, Peruvians in Peru, like, and yet we have so much in common that we can celebrate too. So, so yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
Oh, yeah, it definitely does, and it reminds me of like something you read on your book already. And I'm going to tie our conversations to the lessons and to the things I reflected on the book. Here on the book, you said, and if you have the book, it's page 111. Um, you said, meanwhile, I get split into all these little pieces: Peruvian, disabled, immigrant, fragmented, as if I couldn't possibly be everything all at once and more. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. Growing up here, I felt like I had to sort of be something else when I walked out the door and go to school and be like this, as best I could be, American kid. And then when I walk home, it was Peru. But it was being Peruvian with a touch of America, because I was the oldest, and so I had to sort of help and guide my parents through the, you know, navigating this whole new country, because I was able to pick up the language quickly and I was their translator. But then when we connected with family in Peru, then I had to kind of revert back to being like that Peruvian kid that left when I was 10. And I always felt like, who am I? And my family, my Peruvian family, calls me Sophia, which is my middle name. But here in the US, everybody calls me by my first name, Natalie. And for the longest time, I felt very fragmented, like you describe here. And I guess at what point, and to be honest, for me, creating Peruvians of USA and finding this community has finally allowed me to feel less fragmented and less divided. And I'm just like, I am everything and more, right? So, like, at what point did you feel that? Was it recently, or was it as you know, as you're putting together this beautiful book, or like, when did you feel less fragmented?
Gosh, I do feel like it probably was recently, because I relate to so much of what you said. Like, I remember the first time that I visited Peru, and I was so excited, like I said, because I was like, oh my God, I'm finally going to like visit, you know, my home country and this place that's largely exists in my imagination. And when I got there, my cousins called me La Americana. And then here in the US, it was like, where are you from? And then I would tell people Peru, and they'd be like, they'd kind of stare at me blankly. I mean, I think more people know about Peru now, but when I was young, everyone would just stare at me blankly. And I always had to be like, it's in Latin America. Or I'd be like, you know, and I'd be like, yeah, it's in South America. And like, it's right next to Colombia. And like, I had to be giving geography lessons at the same time. But yeah, I think that really over time, I think in the last few years, where community plays such a big part in it, you know, to find your community, and not only to find, you know, like, I've been very lucky that being a writer, I've also gotten to know a lot of fellow Peruvian writers, And that's helped me realize I'm not alone, and that maybe we shouldn't ever feel like we have to only be half of something, right? Um, and it's still a gradual process. I think it's something that can change over time, or at least some days you feel more secure in yourself than others. But I think definitely the process of writing this book helped me in that too. And not just in in terms of who I am as a Peruana, but like really just as a whole being, and also, even as a disabled Latina, as an immigrant, as someone who loves to swim. She wants to be a mermaid, and that's where her like fantasies live. And that part of her is equally valid, even though her parents are very invested in her having this very serious future that's embodies the American dream. So I feel like when you said, oh, this is a book that you would have loved to have as a teen, I feel that because I think I wrote it wishing I'd had something like that too.
Yeah, and I completely resonate with your mermaid dreams and goals. I remember when I was younger, I wanted to be like a backup dancer, not even like the main dancer, just a backup dancer.
Oh my god, me too.
Like if I could be like the backup dancer to one of J-Lo's videos or something like that, I was like, I made it. That's my life goal. And obviously, parents are like, what?
I wanted to be a cowgirl.
Really?
Oh my god, that was my biggest dream. And then my grandmother one day, because my grandmother mostly like she spoke a little bit of English here and there, but mostly, my grandmother didn't speak a lot of English. Well, she doesn't speak a lot of English, but one day she goes to me, ¿Y tú qué? ¿Te crees la chirilín? And she just like as if so now that's our big thing. Like whatever, we don't like, she made up this word instead of cheerleader, and now it's like the one way that we just joke around every time we want to take someone down a peg. If we think they're being a little too full of themselves. But yeah, no, I think that, yeah, this idea of our dreams being a little bit out there, right? When the generation that came before us sacrificed a lot, hoping that they have an idea of what a better life looks like. And if those two things don't match up, it can be really difficult.
Yeah. And then tying it back to the book again on page 51, where you say, sometimes Leslie doesn't get it. She doesn't know what it's like to have parents who constantly remind you, either in words or by actions, that the endless hard work they endure in this country is all so you can have a better life than they did. As a result, subconsciously, you're always measuring, comparing, asking, am I doing enough to justify what they gave up to come here? You carry all the dreams into your future, which is somehow also theirs, wrapped up in their past and present. You fear making mistakes. You dread coming up short of their expectations, and you can think of nothing worse than disappointing them, because in this family, the opposite of pride isn't shame, it's guilt. Wow. I mean, to have you put that so beautifully and succinctly, I think what so many immigrant kids feel, um, and the pressure that we put on ourselves. I remember friends would ask me, like, why do I have this drive to achieve XYZ when I was in school? Or why did I put so much pressure on me? And I would see also some of my other friends whose parents would put pressure on them, but they had the tools to help them, right? And my parents did not have the tools and resources to help me. So it's like pressure without the support, which is like, then you have to be your own advocate, you have to be your own sort of support, and and so how when I spoke to Melissa Rivero, she's also a Peruvian American writer, she said she couldn't possibly imagine telling her family like that she's going to be a writer. Like that's something that you do for fun, right? Like it's not a career. Like her family was go be a lawyer or like something serious. So how did you communicate to your family like beyond your mermaid dreams, right? Your professional career. What how do they see you now in terms of your career? And what advice do you give to our audience members if they're like going through that period of like, well, I really this is my calling, but hey, my parents gave up all of this for me. I should probably do something more serious. Like, there's always a struggle with us, right? And it doesn't, maybe it gets easier as the older we get, but it's always in the back of our heads, right? Like we need to be responsible. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I feel like I wrote the book and I still don't know exactly the answers, but I wrote it to try and get to them. I think the first thing is that, like, my parents weren't like, they're very different from Vero's parents in a lot of ways. And that's important to me when I write, because I need to create distance in order to write characters. I can't like just put people from my life directly in. I feel like it's there's weird lines of privacy and all these things that get crossed there. But of course, then oftentimes though, it ends up probably there's inspiration and things are rooted in truths, and maybe one character is inspired by someone else unexpected, for example. I think for me though, what I remember, like my parents never like explicitly said any of those things, right? And I don't think they ever would if they thought that would be like hurtful. But I think there's just more like kids are very observant, and we can see whether you have someone who tells you that like, no, you have to, achieve better than us, or whether you just are observing the sacrifices and the hardships every day, day in and day out, that they're going through just to like make sure you get to school, just to make sure that you're, even just telling you, like, I remember at a very young age, my parents told me, like, if you want to go to college, you're gonna have to get a scholarship. And that wasn't them being mean or anything, it was just the reality of it. They were like, we don't know how else we would afford it. And that's always surprising to people, because my father's a doctor, and when we got to the US, he wasn't going to pursue that path anymore, because there's this whole process of getting recertified. But he instead he chose to like start over again from like being a resident on. And so I grew up in this weird position where people were like, oh, your father's a doctor, you guys are well off and you're great. And it was like things were really hard, in a lot of ways. Obviously, like I'm sure there's other people who had all sorts of different challenges, so I'm not trying to misrepresent my experience, but we definitely had this sense of like, if we want opportunities, we have to create them. And for me, I remember I always wanted to pursue the arts. I wanted to be a singer, model, actress, dancer. And it's not that there wasn't, it's not that there was like, I was ever told, no, don't do it. It was just that there was a sense of like, I just never felt like it would be enough. We didn't even have like the resources to even, if I wanted to take those kinds of classes for a while, like it wasn't until like I was in middle school that I took like first dance class, so I think for me, what was challenging was to let go of the sense of shame that I'd internalized. And that's very rooted in the fact that we really, really care what our parents think. We really, really do. Like, like it's a hard thing to just tell someone. And that's kind of what I meant when like in that paragraph, when it's like Leslie just doesn't get it. And of course she wouldn't, right? I think I ended up, like, as I got older, when I started college, I was still very much in that mindset. I actually thought I never thought I was going to be an author. To this day, my day job is still like, my path was journalism, magazines, then copywriting and marketing. And that's still my day job, because I needed, like, how else will I pay my bills and support myself? But there came a time when I also just was like, well, I also, would this be the idea of success if I'm not happy doing it? If I'm also not, like, if my parents sacrificed so much, wouldn't me honoring them also mean that I'm not, like, if I'm going to sacrifice my efforts, my time, and my hard work into a career or a life, then I need to also make it worth it, right? And if I'm not happy at the end of the day, then I think maybe they wouldn't be either. And if they wouldn't, though, at the end of the day, like, I mean, in my case, my parents were very supportive with that. But I think the hard part is realizing, like, yeah, like, whose power are you giving the weight of your happiness to? And sometimes it's not ourselves. Sometimes it's very hard to take that and say it's okay if maybe they, like, if people around us can't see why this matters to us, but if it's somehow feeding our souls and our happiness, then that has to at one point be enough, because there's going to be a point where you really can't change how people around you feel. And you can have those hard conversations, and hopefully that becomes a window to it. But if that doesn't work out, then you have to also be the one to say, well, but this is my path.
Yeah, and just to add into to that, sometimes when you do choose your path, your calling, you will be presented with opportunities you couldn't even have imagined if you just stuck to like the traditional path or whatever saved. So there is it feels risky, and in many ways it is, but like I what I've seen, the moments where I've taken that risk, the moments where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to choose this path, it's when those opportunities have come up that have
Mm,
been amazing. And so
yeah,
yeah,
you're
I
right.
definitely resonate with that.
That's such a good point too, because I mean, there's been so many times, especially as I've gotten older, that like I think when I was like 34, I remember one day thinking, oh my God, my parents were this age when they just packed up and came to the US. And I just thought I could never, I can't imagine it, that the amount of risk, the just going into an unknown, like that. But in a way, when we create our own paths, we're doing that in our own way too. So like, how is that not also honoring, and saying, hey, I'm actually taking inspiration from you, from your courage and your bravery, but I'm just doing it in a different way. It looks different for me than it did for you. Like, we might not be going to a completely new country, but maybe we're forging completely new paths.
Wow, I never thought about it that way, but that is so true. It's just like you're going into the unknown, just a different unknown. Wow. Yeah. Um, so in the book, the main character um has hip dysplasia, and so I'm going to define it for the folks on the call. And you can correct me in any way, like this is me like Googling. The socket in the pelvis into which the femoral head fits is too shallow to support the femoral head, and so that causes it's sort of like difficulty walking. And so I appreciated that this character was so complex in many ways. One of them being she has hip dysplasia, and that causes a lot of conversations around body and body boundaries, which I don't have hip dysplasia, but I have those same concerns about body boundaries as I was growing up, those same feelings of shame, so question, my body wants to do this, parents are telling me no. And even now as an adult, my body's changing, or bodies changed throughout our entire lives, and I'm still having those boundaries questioned, those questions of like, how do I continue to love my body and accept it? And now as an adult, as in my 30s. So I guess you have hip dysplasia. So tell us a bit about that experience. How young were you when you started registering this will be now part of your experience growing up? And how, I guess it seems like perhaps the book helped you come, I guess I want to say make peace, but what, because it's for, especially for women, but I think for many of us now with social media too, we're not at peace with our bodies. We're almost at constant war with our bodies. And this book helped me be more at peace with my body. And so like tell us about your experience, I guess, making
That's
peace
really
with your body.
beautiful. No, that means a lot. Because you're right. There's even just the language we use around our bodies sometimes are very much focused on like fights and war. Just you're right, like even just that phrase of war on our bodies feels very apt. Yeah, I was born with hip dysplasia, and so by the time I was, 2 or 3, I'd already had several surgeries that I didn't remember. That so I guess the question of when it registered, it actually never registered. It just always was. This was my reality, and for lack of a better term, it was my normal. And I say normal in quotes because I don't like, even in the book I question that word. Like, there's, if everyone has a different normal, then is there even a normal? And that word can be used to weaponize one person's experience as more valid than another. but yeah, I grew up being in and out of surgeries, and I, starting at a young age, would be homeschooled while I recovered from surgeries, and I'd be in casts and crutches, and it was not something that ever felt, how do I put it? It never bothered me. What bothered me was when it was other people's perceptions of my body. What was hard was the bullying of, and the stares, and people who just treated me like I was some, like they just didn't know what to do with me. And there was, a lot of, I remember, kids would make fun of how I walked. They would imitate me. They would laugh. They would point at my scars. In my home, I felt very supported, and it wasn't, like I said, really until I was like outside of that safety, where it was just, the world is not kind to disabled people. And at least for me, like I didn't feel at war with my body until I started to feel ostracized for it. And then I started then to internalize that shame and wish my body were different, trying to hide parts of myself, trying to hide my scars, trying to hide the lifts that were in my shoes, like all these different things. And then on top of it, then things that you bring up too is like, you add that as you grow, you add to that your experience as a young girl growing up in a society that is very fat phobic, that gives young women all sorts of body image issues, and that shames us for when we are stepping into our sexuality. So that it's all just so layered, and ultimately it results in this just deeply rooted shame that it's too much for us to carry. It's so hurtful and harmful, and we don't deserve to carry it. And I wanted to reach a point where I started to question it, like, why do we do this, and who benefits from it, right? It's not us. We're only being hurt more, and then we end up hurting others, because then it's like, if we're not questioning these certain standards, then we're perpetuating them, whether consciously or not. So it was just something I was really trying to work out in this book. And I think, Vero, for her, it came, and for so many of us, it comes down to agency. Like the freedom to be able to do with your body, to feel like you can just exist in your body without that shame, and have control over, who decides its fate, how you move through the world, the choices that you make. Again, also very layered when you're, like for me as a disabled Latina, like I think a lot of, so much of my experience growing up really had to do with this, will we or won't we be able to stay, as my parents were sorting out immigration, right? So you grow up internalizing this idea that somebody can tell you, some higher power can tell you where you belong, and can at any moment tell you, no, you can't stay here, you don't belong here, you have to go. And what it ends up happening is, it's like, yeah, there's this lack of control of movement, right? Of just migration, of where we can be, where we can exist, where we can call home. And for me, that intersects a lot with my experiences as a disabled person, right? Like there was a point in which I was writing the book, and I was like, wow, like Vero, she, even down in her bones, her hip, her socket isn't quite fitting in her skeleton. And that resonated a lot with me, because I was like, there's so many times I felt like I didn't fit quite right. I wasn't quite in alignment in the spaces around me. And why would we, when we don't grow up with this, we don't really grow up with this very welcoming message, right? When we're in a country that just wants to either to assimilate or wants to exclude us. So that idea of like, yeah, of agency is, for me, is really, it's rooted too in like whose voice gets to matter, and when you then decide like what is it you want in the world, what does what does your future look like? Like who will get to decide that? Like that's Vero's ultimate like question that she has to go through. And it's something I'm still exploring all the time.
Yeah, I think the theme of agency definitely resonated a lot with me. And it made me think about agency as a young Latina girl, as a young Peruvian girl, not just here in the US, where in some ways you can say, you know, your parents are trying to protect you from things that they don't even know or understand by being super strict and giving you all these rules. But even in my own family, I've noticed how the women and the girls in Peru as well don't have agency over their own bodies. It's almost like somebody else is controlling them. Um, the male figures in the family, because it impacts their pride, it impacts their reputation of the family, y el que dirán.
Mhm.
Um, I guess it also made me think about, as you're describing your experience here and how you never felt at war with your body, except until like perhaps you started to navigate this world and this world wasn't as welcoming to you and your experience. Was there any similarity when you were in Peru? Like, how was it being, you know, having hip dysplasia here and having to, you know, navigate here and then navigate in Peru? I haven't been back in several years, but I guess my memory is we're not friendly. We don't have friendly. We're not accessible to like folks with different abilities. Like I'm thinking of like veredas, like sidewalks, and all the
Mhm.
things that we have here, which are great. But I mean, obviously, there are ways that we can improve here. But I guess I'm curious about your experience being a disabled woman in Peru.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think these are the problems of accessibility exist everywhere. I mean, it's not unique to the US at all. And it's very much rooted in this idea of like who do you who gets to matter in your society? You know, and I mean, one of the things that always shocked me was that when we speak, you know, I'm really curious about language and I'm always like going back and forth with translations. So even just the fact that the word in Spanish for disabled, like we say inválido, like what a horrible way, like really just the language is saying it right there. Just say invalid, you know, and we say that in English too, but not as much, I guess. I don't know. Like I think it's like going, I don't hear it as I don't hear it spoken as freely, I guess, than I do in Spanish. And we have a lot of work to do still in just even in just addressing the fact that disabled people have basic human rights like anyone else. I when I like every time I've been in Peru, like I don't know that I think at the time I don't know that I was self-aware enough. So it's not something that I can really probably um speak to in terms of like, oh, I felt this XYZ when I was physically there. Because part of what I feel is part of my experience as a disabled woman is that there were years when I didn't admit to myself that I was one, because it is a way, like there's this tendency to make it that our society gives us this idea that it's like a bad word and that like who would want to claim it, and there's so much, again, so much shame associated with it. So we really have to like come to a point where we're like questioning that internalized ableism and willing to reject it. So but I like I said, I just think it's something that needs to be integrated across cultures. It's definitely like even in the book, like Vero's parents really, they're trying their best, but they're also, you know, even when it's coming from a place of love, they're not always giving her full agency over her body. And not just when it comes to her hip dysplasia or her medical conditions, but also, yeah, there's like when you were mentioning you know, your experiences and seeing the way that women are not given agency in Peru in the same way, there's so much shame like that comes from just sexual, like that the worst thing we could be is sexual beings, you know, and it's so rooted in like this in religion and like and just passed down through generations. In that even it's just so like to me it felt very stifling to realize that there's all this a lot of restrictions around propriety. You know, what would people think?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I thank you for bringing up that you are interested in defining, because if you read the book, you see here that you define suffocate, what the, you know, Oxford Dictionary would how they would define it, which is deprive of oxygen by force, and then you define it, or Veronica Vero defines it as to take the life out of someone with too much pressure. So I love that. I was like, that is so neat, because words mean to people different things, right? Like you brought up invalido, which you're right, I never thought about it, but the words like discarding, it's like this person's disposable, right? And so and one of the things that made me, I guess, a more mindful person is when there's a scene, I think, when Danny says that's super lame, and you say here, when did a word that describes a person who limps becomes synonymous with boring and bad and uncool? And I will be honest and say I use lame to say, like, oh, you know. And I caught myself saying that in conversation with my husband. I was like, no, I can't say it anymore, that's so rude. And so thank you for, I mean, like, just teaching me, like, to be thoughtful about, like, the words I say. But yeah, I mean, and invalido, lame, like, those are words that had a specific meaning perhaps at the beginning, and then we evolve them to mean something else, right? So I love that you love languages and that you love to define them here. So I definitely want to give the audience like the last 10 minutes or so to ask their questions, but I will want to touch on another topic. Alex in the book. Alex, the boyfriend. um, I was like, what a healthy guy for a young man. I mean, we have been like, growing up, at least my generation, just talks of masculinity, seeing it left and right. I was telling my husband, I don't recall reading a young adult book as a young girl and seeing, like, wow, yeah, that's a great guy, you know, and and how emotionally he has a high EQ, emotionally
Yeah.
coefficient, and how it's almost like I want young men to read the book as well, because it is possible to be a young man, to be a man in this world, and be emotionally intelligent, be attuned to your partner's cues, be, you know, it takes effort, right? It's not doesn't just come naturally, but I was like, what a beautiful example to give a young girl who's reading this book, and hopefully a young guy is also reading this, how you can navigate this world and not be toxic, and
Yeah.
not have to prove your masculinity to the way that we have traditionally have in the past. So what inspired Alex? Who is the Alex in your world?
I love that you brought that up because, you know, in all honesty, when I first started writing Alex, he was going to be more of that toxic masculinity. Like he really, and it's because at the time I was thinking of the examples from my youth. A lot of the people that I remember like being infatuated by, who ultimately would like hurt me and made me feel less than. And it was becoming really hard to write the book when with him like that. And I realized it's because I wanted better for Vero. I didn't want to just keep perpetuating the same thing. And if you read the book, you see that it's not like it's not like I'm pretending that everything's perfect. Like she has had her share of really terrible experiences. But the one that I wanted to really focus on and center in this book, I just thought, like, first of all, I have a lot of faith in our young people. I see them shedding a lot of the toxicity that we have carried for generations. I see them with very clear self-awareness of what they're choosing to perpetuate or choosing to question. And just like a lot more sensitivity that is not necessarily a bad thing, right? When people, I always say, like, when people tell us like, oh, you're being too sensitive, and it's like, no, maybe we're not being sensitive enough. Maybe we've gotten this far just disrespecting people and not thinking of who we're leaving behind. So yeah, Alex really came from this place of like, I want Vero to feel safe and loved in all the ways she deserves. And I wanted the same for Alex. You know, he has depression, he has been through a lot, and they both have these visible and invisible scars that they carry, and it helps them see each other and hear each other in ways that maybe other people in their lives aren't able to do. And I just think that why not have that example be something in a book that someone can look to and think, hey, I want this, right? And I deserve this. And yeah, and honestly, there were already so many things in writing this book that were me kind of digging into places and old wounds, places that felt very vulnerable, that I also needed to bring a lot of lightness into it, a lot of hope and happiness. And I couldn't have gotten through the process of writing this book if it was only pain. Right. And I think life isn't only pain. Life is full of these dualities, and I wanted to capture that. So yeah, that's really what inspired Alex. Like I wanted, you know, I wanted Alex and Vero to feel safe in each other.
Yeah, because it is possible.
Yeah.
And I want young women and young men and men to realize that it is possible to feel that safe, to feel like somebody sees you. And so I just wanted to apply. What a beautiful example. Again, I was like, I wish I would have read this. It would have saved me so many heartbreaks. But thank you for writing this book, for being here with us. I would like to open it up to the audience for any questions, or just like any feedback about your reactions to the book. Please, this is your moment. So feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand and I can unmute you. All right, so let's hear from Lisette. I will see if I can unmute you.
Hi, Natalie. First of all, I loved the book. I loved Alex.
Yay.
I loved Alex and Vita's relationship so much. I wanted to know, is there a possibility for a sequel?
Oh, thank you. First of all, that means a lot that you loved the book. I would love to write a sequel. Right now, it's one of those things that's up to the publishing gods, I guess. Whether a sequel gets published often depends on the performance of a book. I haven't personally written one yet. I've thought of it. I'm not. I can't. You know, I'm not gonna lie and say I haven't thought of it, because a lot of my heart kind of still stays with these characters. So it would be wonderful to be able to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Anyone else? Juan or Christina? Not to call you out. What is it?
Hi, just wanted to comment. Glad no one said any spoilers. I found out about this through Instagram through Peruvian Sisters, and now I'm here. And I stated earlier with that I'm here at my workplace. The library closed at 8, and it was gonna take me half hour to get home. So my boss gave permission just to close up the place instead. Yep. And just gonna share this. I work in Westchester County in New York, and my library system has purchased 7 copies of your books, and one of them is even here in my library right now. And I wasn't even looking for this. I have it ordered and shipped to my house, and I was just walking by, and this is in our new young adult teen section.
Oh my
So
God.
Yep.
That makes me so happy. Thank you. Oh, and thank you for staying, like, you know, all the effort you went through just to be here tonight. That's amazing.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, I'm excited to read this book. I'm excited. I was excited when I found out you wrote this book, as well as for people with disabilities, but as well as the Peruvian identity, of course. And I am an aspiring author myself. I had recently graduated with a bachelor's in literature, and I don't have anything like this in mind of writing. My senior project to get my bachelor's involved. I wrote a compilation that studied the Inca mythologies, basically, and that was really fun. And it also started my journey into what does it mean to be Peruvian to me. And you, everything you said nailed it just out of the park, whatever the expression is. So I'm very excited to read this book, and until mine's maybe 3 more days away by tracking number, I might just take this out already.
Oh my God, thank you. And I'm so excited for your writing too. Like, please stay in touch because I'm always so excited to connect with other Peruvian writers.
That would also be the goal, to one day be where you are, giving
Yeah.
my own presentation on my book.
No, of course, and that's the thing, and we need like to support each other, and I always just want more and more of us, you know. So
Excellent.
Yeah, I'll book you, Juan. You can talk about your book on the podcast.
Woo!
All right, so I guess I won't put a lot of pressure on Christina, but if Christina, you don't have any questions, let me see. Let me give her a minute. Or comments.
No questions, just that I really like the book. I try to find a lot of the Latin American or US Latin American writers. I like this is the first of a Peruvian one that I have because it's not usually the one that's commonly available.
well, so I would say definitely check out Melissa Rivero's work. Angela Velez is another young adult author, and her first book came out in March, I believe, of this year, earlier this year. It's called Lulo and Milagros Search for Clarity. And so there's a lot. There's like I'm terrible sometimes of like off the top of my head, but I will be I'll happily share more. I posted several Peruvian authors on Instagram too for 28 de Julio because I was like, there's, I want there to be more of us, and we're here, we're doing the work, and we're also trying to help one another, always get our voices out there and heard.
Well, Natalia, and to the audience, thank you so much for joining this call. Please get yourself a copy. Give this as a gift to someone. The holidays are coming. Let's make this a very popular book. Let's make sure that other Peruvians know about it. We all have shared here. This is, to many of us, is the first Peruvian author that we're reading. It's the first time we're seeing ourselves reflected in the stories. So give that gift to someone else. Buy a copy, promote it. I definitely want more Peruvian authors to be out there and for us to get to know them. So again, to everybody, thank you so much. Natalia, I appreciate you so much. I thank you for writing this book. It has healed some parts of me, so I definitely appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Good night.
This lovely conversation. And
All right, thank you, everyone.
real quick, I don't know if we're still recording or not, but I put in the chat because I would love, like if I'm not following you back on Instagram, please let me know. I would love to like just keep in touch, and I'm always happy to connect. So
yeah, for sure. And I'll send a note and the link, and I'll send your contact information that from your website and your Instagram links, so folks can connect with you through there as well. So
thank you all so much. This was so lovely, and thank you again, Natalie. It means a lot.
of course. All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Ciao.